Well, good morning. Here we are on Thursday, and we're looking at the third of the Beatitudes, and it's probably already been for you somewhat of a strange journey. Blessed are the poor in spirit. In other words, we're talking about people who have been crushed by life circumstances, and we sit back and say, where's the blessing in that? And yet, he says that is the entryway when we despair of ourselves. We give up on our own solutions and our own empowerment, and we begin to say, okay, God, I'm willing to follow you where you want me to go. And as we follow him, he leads us in a new pathway. And the new pathway is not the most welcoming pathway in a sense, because he said, secondly, is blessed are those who mourn. The grief that comes over certain things, it empties us. I know that my wife and I, over the last few weeks, have had a particularly heavy burden for many people that we know and love, and literally it's brought us to weeping and tears before the Lord, and there's something about that kind of grief where you see people's lives being destroyed by poor choices and unfair circumstances. And you start crying out for them and asking God to be kind to them. And he says, there's a comfort that you get when you go through that. You'll be comforted. And the comfort really is not only God saying, you can trust me, but it's when you begin to see how God uses everything for his glory. He causes, as Paul says in Romans 8:28, everything to work together for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purposes. And so he's calling to us. We're following him in this journey. We're taking each of these 8 steps up towards the height of the mountain where God says the glory rests. And basically, he says to us in this third beatitude, blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. And I mean, there again, it's such a contradictory statement if we look at it from just a superficial view. I mean, the meek are the people who get crushed. They don't inherit anything. They don't control anything. They are controlled and dominated by others. And so right away we say meek, weak, I'm really not down with this. And particularly because we live in an age which is all about being assertive and, standing up for your rights and pushing your way through. It's interesting. It sounds really like good advice. And I know a lot of people who are really go through life in a kind of an attacking manner. They're very, very aggressive. And they think, and basically it looks ostensibly like they're winning. As Asaph said in Psalm 73, he says, I was envious of the wicked. But then as he goes on, he says, but then I saw their end. And he says, when I began to recognize that what is really the ultimate consequence of their lifestyle, their choices, their aggressiveness, their seeking to constantly acquire more and more that they might have more and more power, he said at the end, they're people to be pitied. They're empty and unfulfilled and unsatisfied. They spent their whole life pursuing something that they didn't quite know was there, and when they got to the top of the heap, they found out it was nothing more than a pile of manure. And that's really what God is trying to say to us. He said that, again, as I mentioned the other day, the way up is the way down. That if you really want to see your life in this world fulfilled in a really satisfying way, he says it's going to come through humility. In fact, the word that weak literally means to lack power, to have no strength, to have no energy, liable to break or give away under pressure, to be easily damaged. It's quite the opposite of being somebody who is strong. And that's why I think, Barclay says in one of his commentaries, he says, when we hear the word meek, it paints the picture of submissive and ineffective creature. And yet, ironically, when God talks to Isaiah and he tells him, here's the guy that I esteem. In other words, when God looks at humanity, there are certain people that are attractive to him, not because of their outward or physical appearances or their physical or material accomplishments, not because of their intellect, learning, or any of that things of that nature. He says, the person I find attractive, he says, has 3 characteristics. He says, number 1, he's humble. Number 2, he's contrite. And number 3, he trembles at my word. I mean, what is it to be humble? It means to be poor in spirit, to be bowed down before God, in absolute surrender to him. God says, I look for that person. First and foremost, I'm looking around the world and I'm looking, who are the people who are bowed down before me, who are humbly submitted to me, and have really given up on their own agenda for their life and are desperate to know my agenda. The second thing he says, they're contrite, which means to be, again, brokenhearted. They're disillusioned with life. They're disillusioned with self. And they begin to realize that the superficial life is just that. It's superficial. But I want to dig deeper into the things of God that I might know Him more intimately and experience what my life is really about. Because one of the things we need to keep in perspective, you may live to be 70, 80, maybe 90 years upon this planet or more, but then you die and it's over. We're basically looking at the bookends of birth and death. But what comes after that? After that comes eternity, where you enter into a timeless, never-ending, constant reality. And I often, when I share with people the gospel, I like to point out to the non-Christian that where are you going to spend that eternity, that endless, timeless place where nothing can be changed or altered, that who you are when you enter eternity is who you are for all of eternity. And do you want to enter it in as a child of God or a child of the devil? And do you want to suffer with the devil, or do you want to reign and rejoice with Christ? And that really is what it comes down to, is that when we become brokenhearted, we're disillusioned in ourselves. We're contrite and broken before God. The third thing he says is that he trembles at my word. And that means to be meek, to be dependent upon God, and really in a way fearful of offending God. That it's not like I live in this feeling of threat or danger that God's going to smack me if I don't do everything exactly right. But I also live in a way saying I don't want to consciously do something that I know is contrary to God and offensive to Him. And I do that on my own without intentionally doing it, because I'm sometimes really dumb, dense, and stupid. But the point is that I don't want to consciously say, I know that I shouldn't do that, but I'm going to do that anyway. And that's what he's talking about. Somebody who trembles at his word, they just take God seriously. They know when God says it, He means it. And that it's not for me to try to play fast and loose with the truth. That I want to be committed to His word. So he says these things, that we're humble, we're surrendered to God, that we're brokenhearted or contrite, we've given up on self and stopped looking to ourselves for the answer of what makes life meaningful. And instead, we look at His word, and we take His word so seriously that when we discover that we're transgressing it, we really kind of shake inside and we say, God, forgive me and help me to walk uprightly before You. There's so much in these passages, isn't there? There's so much to glean, and in terms of applying to their life, it is such a challenge, but it is so very important. So we'll talk again tomorrow as we continue looking at the Beatitudes.